Welcome. It's just on 7:15, Wednesday, the 12th of May, and you are watching episode 6 of Regional Wrap. Regional Wrap, providing an insight to the issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to the regional residents. My name is Bill Bates, and joining me tonight on this episode is my guest, Chris Squelch. Chris has a number of career changes during his lifetime, starting with a rapid electronics engineering and later returning to the family farm and earth moving business. He developed an interest in downstream and movement of food from the farm, processing and delivery. So it's basically the plate to plate concept. Chris gained a degree from the University of Tasmania, specialising in food logistics, and went on to write a number of studies for the Queensland Government. He has worked as a consultant and supply chain manager for about 12 years in the perishable food industry. Chris, that's about your past employment. Can you tell us something about your present role?
As from yesterday, when I turned 66, I basically retired. So,
All right, what was your last position? Keep busy.
Before that, I was a clinical counsellor in dealing mostly with men and dealing mostly with drug and alcohol problems, mental health, acquired brain injury, criminality, and very low vocational, educational and social skills. So I worked mainly with men. A lot of them were Aboriginal men, quite a few prisoners, quite a few persons who'd sort of fallen on hard luck, and also men out in the bush who don't bother sticking their hand up when something's wrong.
Until it's far too late.
It's too late, yeah.
Can you tell me how you got to be such a strong advocate regarding the Burdekin Dam, and especially the original concept of the original stage 2 as it was built for?
The Burdekin Dam was designed to be to have a set of floodgates on it, 14.6 metres high. It's that big gap where the floodwater comes through. That's where the floodgates would go normally. Now the dam's basically half finished. It was the federal government, they shelled out all this money for it, and the state government did at the time too. I've had a lot to do with Ted Lindsay, who was a mover and shaker, biggest mover and shaker probably for the Burdekin Dam in the first place. But I became interested in water when I was about from birth, basically, because I came from a farming family, and water was always absolutely paramount. And we never ever had enough of it. You've got the situation here, and also with the food logistics, which I was in for years. One of my main areas of interest was food production, storage and handling here in North Queensland, and the Burdekin in particular. So the first time I came up here was about 1988, I think, when I did a study for DPI, and I think there were about 1,000 farmers in the Burdekin back then, and now there's only about 400, I think. So yeah, it's not. It was actually, the situation back then was actually better than it is now. Like, you had people who grew broadacre crops of French beans, and all sorts of stuff was happening, and there was a lot of hope and a lot of forward thinking going on. But that seems to have died largely. Everybody's just trying to survive.
Is that because basically the cost of things now, that you need more land to get a reasonable income, or it's just not the money in agriculture compared with the input you've got to put in?
Well, if you're growing cane in the Burdekin, I reckon you'd just about break even. But yeah, I think various people have shown me that, you know, if you're growing cane, you're going backwards basically. But all that water supply is being used on cane is really not much use, really, when it's all said and done.
Yeah, well, there's much more profitable crops, you would think,
Well,
but
there's two immediately come to mind. One's cotton, and the other one is rice. Though yesterday day before, I was down in the Burdekin, and I was talking to this guy who was doing some planting. I said, "Well, what are you actually planting?" He said, "Peanuts." So he's planting peanuts, which is a first, as far as I can see down there. But that's quite a good possibility too.
well, that's usually Kingaroy, isn't it? Kingaroy's known for peanuts.
But I think Kingaroy probably grow their peanuts in summer. Up here, would grow them in winter.
Ah, well, there you go. I just want to share a screen for the audience. So the creation of the Burdekin Dam actually made an artificial lake, which is Lake Dalrymple.
Yeah.
And construction was completed in 1982, commenced in 82 and finished in 97, which five-year project, which is pretty good.
I beg to differ. There is half finished in 87.
All right. Well, stage one that they intended to do at that time was completed. Stage two was a future vision. But at least the government of the day, and Joe, they acquired the land. So, and if stage two went ahead at a later date, which is intended, land's already acquired, and you basically don't have to acquire any land. So that dam has a surface area of 224 square kilometres, and holds, this is a lot, 1,860,000 megalitres of water, which is 4 times the Sydney Harbour. So that's the current dam.
Yeah.
Now, if we added another 14 metres on top, I'd expect we'd double that, at least double that amount of water and the area coverage.
Yeah, about 2.5 times. It'll go up to about 3.6, 3.8 million megalitres, I think, if I'm right. Well, it's about another 2 million megalitres.
And the other thing, I'll stop that share now. But the other thing too, the original stage 2 with the spillway gate also gave control of that outflow. So basically, you could release the water in a controlled method, whereas at the moment, when we have good rains, I think the Burdekin Dam can overflow for about 3 months of the year in a good year.
Yeah, the first thunderstorm that we ever get every year fills up the dam, and up the Burdekin, up towards Valley of Lagoons or down the Belyando. The first big thunderstorm of the year fills the dam and straight over the spillway, and from then on, every bit of the rain, including the monsoon, goes straight over the spillway and out to sea.
And a lot of silt and soil goes out to the roof. So
that's right. Turbidity.
14 metres on in a spillway, much better for the environment.
It'll still overflow, but we'll capture another 2 million megalitres. Now, I think you've seen that video, that short video I took there, what was it, year before last, when we had that big wet. I think there was about 6 or 8 metres of water going over that spillway. An enormous flow of water, and 500 metres wide, travelling at about 10 kilometres an hour and 6 to 8 metres deep. I mean, it's just an enormous flow of water, and it just went straight out to sea.
The other thing is too, I mean, the Burdekin is so good in regards to it's got such a huge catchment area. I mean,
yes, it has.
The catchment area is about 114,000 square kilometres, which is almost twice the size of Tasmania. That's the catchment area. And it extends right down to Emerald.
Yes, or down further, yeah, at least the Beliando River flows comes from way down there north of Alpha.
Well, that makes it one of the most reliable sources of water in Australia. It's
Easily.
overflowed 31 years out of 33.
That's right.
So that's an extremely reliable water source, and it really needs to be enhanced.
Well, the people that had the vision to build the Burdekin Falls Dam, like people like Ted Lindsay and Joe Peterson and all those old guys from back in that era, they didn't intend it to go on just as stage one forever. They wanted it to go to stage two. Now the main reason for that is because you can expand, you can grow an awful lot more with a lot more water, and of course you can utilise the water from the bigger dam to generate electricity.
Well, I think the provision is already there for at least a 500 megawatt hydro scheme.
See, that 500 megawatt hydro scheme was dependent upon the 14.6 metre floodgates.
Yes, yeah, but they actually built the space inside the dam to hold the turbines and all that. That's already there.
It's all there.
Yeah. So they were forward thinking. They had vision, and the problem is new generations of governments come along, don't want to spend any money on infrastructure and just want to delay the progress of our region, continually hold us back. So,
well, one of the reasons, of course, the biggest reason here, Bill, is the Greens. The Greens hate farming. They've got the knife into farming, knife into mining. Every bit of all our major industries, they want us to shut them down or slow them down or do something ludicrous with them. But they've made it so damned hard that a lot of people just couldn't be bothered anymore. But you will have heard that some luminaries in Brisbane want to raise the level of the Burdekin Dam by 2 metres. Now, why anyone would want to do that has got me completely stumped. It's almost useless. And when you sit and think about it, if they put that monstrosity on top of the dam where it is now, instead of the 14.6 metre floodgates, they would destroy any option to put in the big 14.6 metre floodgates and raise the size of the dam to 3.8 million megalitres.
Cynical me suggests that that's the whole purpose.
That's the whole purpose.
Sabotage it,
and I'd rather they did absolutely nothing to it than raise it 2 metres. But we've got all LNP people who should know better, have got on board with the 2 metre stupidity too. Like Deb Frecklington got on board with the 2 metre, even though we took her around, showed her everything, talked to her, explained it all to her with people like Barry Lowe and Ted Lindsay and Steve Manning and all the people who designed and built the blasted dam. Didn't take any notice. In the end, all she could do was fall over backwards and accept what the Greens are saying.
Well, we do now have we did have a public inquiry that started towards the end of last year, and it just finished in, I think closing date was the 31st of January, and they did issue their report on the 31st of March, which is was the submissions into an environmental impact study in terms of reference. So that document is actually there now, giving all the terms of reference for the environmental impact study. And what happened is Sun Water has raised this requirement. What they've basically come up and said is that as part of the needs for Townsville's water and that, we need more water. And Sunwater recommends that we increase the storage capacity of the dam. Now, instead of just implementing the original stage 2, they've come up with a proposal. Well, we need this amount of water for the future for Townsville and a few other things. And between 2 2 and 6 metres is sufficient enough height to meet that requirement. But that's urban water usage. That's not irrigation, right? And the original dam was there for, you on Chris, the original dam was there for irrigation. So they're not putting emphasis on what its original intent was. We've just lost Chris there. We'll try to get him back. You back, Chris? Yep. No, you're back.
Right, we got you back, Bill.
Okay. So they've already gone ahead and got it in their mind. They've done Water's proposal for at least 2 metres and maybe up to 6 metres raising the wall, and that's now in the documentation. That came about from a paper called Government's Roles in Cities. In other words, it was the federal government. They went out and they sort of basically looked at what their role was to improve things in the city. And that was one of the outcomes in regards to the submissions by Enterprise Townsville that they needed more water. And that's basically what's happened. They've just caught on to this small increase between 2 and 6 metres as a requirement for urban type water, rather than fall back to the original 14.6 metre.
I've got you back again, Bill.
You're back. I can see you. You there, Chris?
Hello. Yep.
Okay. So we do seem to have this connection now, that, and they're calling this stage 2, and it's starting to sort of take over from knowledge of the original stage 2.
Well, it's a fraud, really. The Sunwater is full of green fellow travellers and people who have no real idea what they're doing. They're trying to tell us that, you know, if they bodgy up the dam and raise it 2 metres, it'll have enough water for towns. Well, for how long and in the foreseeable future? And what about an increase in farming, or aren't we interested in that anymore?
Well, if you've travelled the area fairly extensively and you know a lot of the growers down there, can you give us a bit of an idea of what people are capable of growing now, and then what more areas could be expanded to if the 14.6 metres was built?
Well, for a start, we could expand the irrigation area south along the coastal plain as far as Guthalunga, and probably even pipe water as far as Bowen, because it's always a shortage of water. And that stretch of coastland grows a lot of fruit, or mostly vegetables, winter vegetables largely. Could also grow rice all along that black soil, cracking clay black soil country. Could also grow a significant amount of rice.
We've already got rice grower, haven't we?
We've got a little bit of rice growing, not much. It's just a bit.
But it just proves that you can do it.
Oh yeah, it grows really well. You get 8 to 10 tonnes per hectare growing rice in the Burdekin.
So also speaking that with Barry Low, in that there's significant enough water there to sort of actually pipe towards the Flinders River.
Well,
is another feasible option as well.
Well, I would suggest that there's enough water falls on the Flinders catchment to dam it up anyway in a number of places, and the Flinders, it gets an enormous flow of water, particularly down the bottom end of it. But from the Dutton River downward, it's just enormous flow of water. But I would say there's an adequate places for dams along the Flinders. But yeah, that modified Bradfield scheme is a possibility. Yeah.
Just continue on with that line. I mean, we have got a situation now where there's a big push for Hell's Gate, and Bobcat has always been one of his pet projects, and now the government's a bit strapped for voting power in the House, seeing that they lost one of their members recently as an independent down in New South Wales. Hell's Gate, I mean, it's only got a catchment area of about 17,000 square metres. It's not really
kilometres.
Yeah, square kilometres.
The advantage of the Hell's Gate catchment is, of course, the advantage of the Hell's Gate catchment is it's up the upper end of the Burdekin, where there's a lot of rain, huge amount of rain does fall. Up the Valley of Lagoons direction, also up the Carter River. Get a lot of rain up in there during the monsoon, but more than down the Beliando direction. My view of the Hell's Gate Dam is it's an enormously visionary program. It may have some incredible benefits for the inland in future years, but the chances of managing to get $20 billion out of the government to build it is not very high, where the chances to get 1.5 billion out of the government to put the 14.6 metre floodgates on the Burdekin Falls Dam is fairly reasonable. But
the thing is, 2 metres, I've seen some of the initial costings, is $600 million anyway. You know, like for the 2 metres.
Well, it's a fraud. The whole idea is to wreck the possibility of putting the 14.6 metres in, and therefore limit farming and production on the coastal plain.
Just going back to Hell's Gate, even if they sort of started today sort of organising and say, yeah, well, we're in favour with it, we'll go through and do a EIS and we'll do all the rest of the studies and construct, you're at least 10 years away.
That's right.
Burdekin is basically shovel ready if you stick to the original stage 2.
Well, if you stick to the original stage 2, you're way out in front, aren't you?
Well, you've already, in their foresight in those days, back in the 80s when we had visionaries, they actually acquired the land, the flood area back then. So they bought the land. So that's now just in the leaseholding to people, but set aside, paid for to hold the water for that stage 2. I mean, there's nothing extra other than the construction. The government's got nothing else to stump up for than the actual concrete, labour, steel, and bits of other pieces. They don't have to acquire anything. They don't really even. They don't really need to do an EIS because that approval is already done. It's already approved back then. They can make a lot of song and dance about it. They say, "Oh no, you have to do a new one," but that's not true. If they stick,
that's a load of rubbish.
Yeah. But what they're doing by changing it just to the 2 metres or 6 metres, they have invented something different. So they're going to do an EIS, and I've actually looked up.
It comes back to one thing, Barry, Bill. It comes back to one thing. That is the Greens and their fellow travellers, the socialist fellow travellers in the government, do not want any more farming. They object to farming for some unknown reason. I don't know where they think they're going to eat, but somehow they think that we're all going to have little peasant plots in our back garden and grow our own food or some rubbish.
No, it's just another thing we'll buy from the Chinese.
We'll buy it all. Some fool told me that we'll just import it all from overseas. I said, well, how are you going to pay for it? Well, we got tons of money. I said, no, you won't, because you're screwing up the mining industry and the agricultural industry, our 2 big industries. Where are you going to get the money?
That's right. Yeah.
I'll tell you what, if the Chinese came here and took the place over, they'd have the 14.6 metre floodgates in there within 2 months.
and they'd have a 4-lane each way Bruce Highway within
right.
5 years, and in 10 years they'd have a fast rail from Cairns to Brisbane.
That's right. They wouldn't be fooling about wasting money on stupidity. They'd actually spend the money on projects that make money.
Just going back to how do you think we can sort of get people to sort of get back and focus on the original project? Do you see any way? We've had the inquiry into the EIS and the terms of reference for the EIS. There were 69 submissions. I haven't been able to read them as yet, but I certainly haven't heard any really noisy protests or anything from Ag Force or anything from any of the growers in regards to this scaled down proposal that will, cripple them in the long run.
You know what the average age of the Queensland farmer is?
Probably 72. From the ones I've spoken to.
I think it's 68 now.
Yeah, well, I'm too far off.
Most of them have decided, well, we're just going to keep going until we finish up, and then they can all stick it from that point on. If they starve, it's their own bad luck.
I'm just surprised that there's no organised front by Ag Force, cane growers, all those bodies. So people are paying money into every year, and there's exactly zero noise about it. I mean, they should be jumping up and down. Plus, even I don't know who the mayor of the Burdekin is or anything like that. But even you'd think just the local government types and local government member. I mean, well, you've got in the Burdekin, you've got LNP, the furthest most north LNP member, Dale Last, and I think he's the shadow member for the northern Queensland or whatever. But I don't think we've even heard a whimper out of him over this issue.
Never heard a thing. Never heard a thing from him. Poor old Dale is well named, I'm afraid.
Well known for his silence.
Your last, mate.
Okay then. Just going on to other sad stories about dams. We last year, before we talked to you, we also talked to Eddie Path from the Save Paradise Dams group. Now, well, there's another thing that was a fait accompli. Before the public even got a voice, the government had made up its mind to rip the thing down by at least several metres. It didn't matter that the public went and got a world-renowned expert on those earth dams.
Even I can come along there years after building any dams. I could come along there and take one look at it and the way they built it and give them a solution to their problem. And I ran this past Barry Lowe and Steve Manning and Ted Lindsay there one day, and they said, yeah, that would work. It's just basically drilling, get a boring machine on the top and drill a hole straight down into the bedrock along the top of the dam and put piles in. See, the problem is the way they built the dam is they built it like in stratas of concrete and gravel, and it was all rolled in and continually rolled all the way to the top. But either they had a holiday or something a number of times along the way, and the stratas were.
Don't you remember long weekends and rostered days off?
That's right. So the strata.
So no work gets done, and so there's no binding for the next layer.
That's right. So it doesn't bind with the one below it properly. And that's what's happened. It's moving laterally. It's the pressure, the power, the weight of the water above the dam is pushing these layers laterally downstream. And all
Well,
they do basically
the American expert who came up with that exact same proposal and a costing that was a fraction
fraction of it, a fraction.
What fraction of what they were what this cost them to pull it down, and
not to mention the loss of productivity from all those farmers who are relying upon the water. Now the thing's
the other thing is Bundaberg has had a lot of investment because of the Paradise Dam. They've had macadamia plantations and a lot of other crops put in there, and they depended on that water. And now it's gone. And the other thing that happened,
what are they all going to do now?
Even when they decided to let the water out, they let it out at a time when no one needed it. You know, the extra allocation just says, we're going to release the water on this date, whatever. You can have as much as you want, but the thing is, it was that time of year you didn't want water, you didn't need water, so it just went out to sea. But
I've got to. If anybody comes to you and says, "Well, Sunwater has said that this is a great idea, or that's a great idea, or they've determined such and such, or X, Y, Z," ask them who was it in charge of the Wivenhoe Dam. Who ran the Wivenhoe Dam when Brisbane got flooded? Who ran the Ross River Dam when Townsville got flooded? Who was it who actually did all the planning and worked for the Paradise Dam, which turned out to be a dud? And now you're telling me that you only want to put 2 meters on top of the Burdekin spillway,
based on the experts from Sunwater.
On the experts from Sunwater.
Well, if you can just touch another dam, Ivanhoe and the floods, right? Ivanhoe Dam and the floods, and I think it was 2011, and then there was another one in 15 or something like that. But if you go back to the big floods of 1974, right? There was no Ivanhoe Dam, there was just the Somerset.
Yeah.
And the Royal Commission came out and says, they had a big inquiry because of immense damage done in that 74 flood, and had Joe in then and his government in. The Royal Commission came out with a recommendation. The recommendation was you build 3 dams downstream of the Somerset. First would be the Wivenhoe, which was a flood mitigation and storage.
Yep.
And then there was to be 2 other smaller dams further downstream, which were to be flood mitigation dams.
Yeah.
Now, Joe went through and he took those recommendations on board and started with the Wivenhoe Dam within, I think it was in about 2 years of the Royal Commission, actually got everything in place, bought all the reserves for all those 3 dams.
Yeah.
Now they built the Wivenhoe, and I think that got up and operational in the late 80s, just before I think about 86, and that's when that was the end of the Joe era. I think with the Fitzgerald report inquiry came in, Joe left, and then we turned over to the Labor government. The first cab off the rank was not to build the additional 2 dams. After that, those reserves, those areas that were reserved for those 2 mitigation dams became classified as state forest or state parks or something, which at least prevents you from building a dam. So first thing they did is get in there and stop doing what the Royal Commission had basically recommended.
Yeah.
Surprise, surprise, come a few years later,
Brisbane gets a great big flood.
Have another flood and another flood. I think you've had three good floods in Brisbane, but I think the big one was 2011 that gave everyone a bit of a shock. It was and the Wivenhoe was overflowed. That was bad management. The whole point is,
well, jump back there a bit, Bill. Who was actually managing the dam?
Well, Sunwater, of course.
Oh, there you go.
But the thing is, it was supposed to be a flood mitigation and water storage. It was supposed to be both.
So it was full. It was full at the start of the wet season, and they let
That's
it.
right.
Then they let it fill right up, and then they got some really big monsoon type rain, and of course there's nowhere for it to go but straight downstream.
But the thing is, they became so obsessed with water in regards to we've got to have all this water storage for Brisbane and the urban requirements, and they didn't really. They kept it far too full too long, and the thing is, they even had a bit of an idea of those forecasts on that weekend. They should have known because the rain started north.
Yep.
The rain had already pelted down in the north, and it was already on its way down through the system. And then there was additional rain.
Yeah, any meteorologist worth his salt could see the massive inflow of rain and clouds coming straight in there over from about Bundaberg south into the Sunshine Coast. And I watched it as it happened. I watched it as it unfolded. I thought this is going to be disaster for sure. You could see the massive inflow of moisture and clouds and rain coming. And it was too late then, of course.
But the other thing is too, it was also a weekend. We don't really run things on the weekend, do we?
It's sun water, for God's sake. I mean, this is an organisation, really, when it's all said and done, that basically could not find its rear end with both hands on a bright sunny day. I mean, they're just hopeless. And they want to now put a 2 metre slab of concrete on the Burdekin Dam to do what? To screw up the dam so it can't it's the future, so it can't. We have no future.
Yeah, but don't forget, we're only North Queensland, so we don't matter.
Well, you don't, basically. I tell you, really, you literally do not.
But going back to the Wivenhoe situation, I mean, that thing was filling so fast, and I mean, they got into a situation where they really had to let the water out. It was already flooded down river, and they just simply added to the problem. Whereas if they had it done, they managed what their procedures were. If they had kept the dam at about 80%, for that, and as the rains come, just let it out before it hits, they would have been in a much better position. But it still boils down to the same old problem. We have people who are visionaries back in the 80s and that.
Now we've got sun water.
well, now we've got a regressive regime. Basically, wants to sort of make us go back to the Stone Age or something. Instead of looking forward and being visionary, let's get rid of everything that's forward thinking and just keep going backwards, because that's what it seems to be like, especially in regional Queensland.
They're the modern day Luddites, Bill.
But they're all keen for building tunnels under rivers for cars.
Oh, 5 billion, which will allow people in South Brisbane to get home 10 minutes earlier than normal.
But they sit down and they do this cost benefit analysis that will save tens of billions of dollars over time. I can't see how you can equate, because that's not, you're not gaining 8 minutes of work time. These people are just getting 8 minutes home time extra. There's no increase in productivity. It's not an extra 8 minutes work.
No, it meant 8 more minutes sitting on the train. That's all.
So this is the problem we really have up here, and I don't. There's no way that the situation is going to improve while Brisbane keeps making these decisions for us. So that's one thing.
Yeah.
People just need to wake up to themselves. Brisbane is the problem. Brisbane is never going to be the solution.
Yes.
But it still seems to me people in ag force and cane growers and even business and political leadership up here still cast their eyes to Brisbane to basically, we've got a problem, you solve it. It's like crime. It's like crime. The only reason we've got so much crime is because Brisbane's not doing its job. It's made it
Yeah.
enhanced criminal activity by some of its actions, and then we're the ones who have to bear the brunt of it. Like, we're the perpetual victims because they've come up with their policy.
So, Bill, I have an eternal hatred of being a victim. So I don't see myself as a victim. But I do see what they're doing, and I think it's the people up here.
I think it's just we're too tolerant. We don't expect anything. We don't expect any better. We've just grown so used to, well, this is how it is. And then if they give it,
it's like living in a communist regime. After a while, the people get so repressed that they don't question anything in the end, and nothing ever happens anyway. So what's the point? And
the other thing is they get ecstatic. They get ecstatic when the state government spends it, $100 million. Oh, take our road out of Cairns towards Smithfield, being duplicated that $150 million. Like, everyone gets excited about that. $150 million for improving the road. Not that's going to improve, it's only going to shift the bottleneck. But they get ecstatic over that. Yet Brisbane just naturally expects a $5 billion project on the Cross River Rail, which is going to blow out to $12 billion.
Yeah.
And they upgrade the M1 for another $5 billion. And yet people in North Queensland and Central Queensland ecstatic when you get $100 million spent on you, and you're being robbed. You're being robbed. They've taken $4 billion from your coal exports, from the royalties, and they've given you back $100 million. Thank you.
That's right. So what's happening? We've got a government. We've got a government that is basically like most governments. They just govern for the votes. They're not interested in governing the state at all. It's actually the government. It's the government of Brisbane. It's not the government of Queensland at all. And they've figured out that they don't really have to care about anybody outside of that southeast corner at all.
Well, like this, there's 73 seats within 250 kilometres of Brisbane CBD, and by the LNP or Labor can a good bulk of them, they hold government. So we're only an afterthought. So all the policies and basically that, and the appeal is to that demographic. So it's something we've got to, something we just got to bear, or we just have to get frustrated enough to actually create a separate state. But that's another thing. If we just touch again on visionaries, and we're talking about dams and water. I mean, to me, the people, 100 odd years ago, the people around Federation in that era, they were visionaries and they were leaders. They made great decisions, and they made tough decisions, and they had commitment, and they had the belief that they were going to, from these 6 fledgling colonies, they're going to build a nation. Now, one of those people behind the Federation movement from West Australia was John Forrest, and he was the premier in the 1890s. Now, West Australia, as a colony, was a latecomer. It wasn't settled to 1829, but it didn't get self-government, its own parliament, until late 1880s, early 1890s. So, as a fledgling colonial government, with less than 50,000 people at the time. So you haven't got a big revenue base.
No.
However, they did, fortunately, as 1890 came along, they did find Kalgoorlie and Coolgardie and gold.
Yeah, that's right.
They saw the potential in that in huge bucket loads of tons. But the big problem,
But what did
water.
Water.
No water. So imagine this for a person with taking the bulls by the horn. The then Premier of West Australia went out with the agreement of their parliament and borrowed £2.5 million.
Put a pipeline in.
That is equivalent to $40 billion these days. Now,
Yeah.
they had to pay that back, of course, somewhere along the line.
Yeah.
That's the confidence they had in themselves and in the resources of Kalgoorlie and Coolgardie minefields, minefields. So they spent that on building 2 dams, the Mundaring Wirra and the Canning Dam. It's 500 odd kilometres of pipeline, 4 big pumping stations, and pump water to Kalgoorlie that's still getting pumped there today. And that Kalgoorlie area is still producing bucket loads of gold and for the benefit of all West Australians. Now, that's visionary.
That's right.
Can you imagine, when we talk about something like the Bradfield scheme or something like that, and people cringe.
Well, they just laugh at you. They just laugh at you now. If you mention the Bradfield scheme, all the darn Greens and all the poo bars from the south will come out of the woodwork and say it's been proven to be infeasible. Well, no, it hasn't been proven to be infeasible at all. It's just that the government doesn't want to spend the money on it, that's all. But a classic sort of case here in Townsville is the 250 million spent on the football stadium. Now you spend 250 million on a football stadium when you haven't got a guaranteed water supply for the city.
You've got to water that grass.
Well, you've got to water everything. I mean, there's nothing worse than living in Brownsville. It is bad for everybody. I mean, the whole thing dries. You plant a garden and it dies. I mean, you put water on it and you get the bill and you just about pass out. So what do? They put a pipeline in from the currents of the Ross River Dam, and they ran this pipeline all the way up over the Horton River and into the supposedly it's supposed to connect up to the some canal over there in the Burdekin, the Wills Canal, I think. Now I noticed it was supposed to be finished back in December. Now its work on it appears to have stopped as far as I can see, and it isn't connected to any water supply. It's not connected to any pump station. I reckon that they've gone broke. I reckon they've run out of money.
We'll find out eventually. I suppose all these things come to light. But again, just talking about things like stadiums, that's the same old philosophy as the Romans had. Let's give the plebs entertainment.
Yes,
so you
build circuses.
So you build them a $250 million stadium, and then stick them with ongoing maintenance. So now Townsville has got a stadium. What it's got to do is got to income to pay for the running costs of that and maintenance. That's no small feat. So these things like stadiums are not assets. They're not wealth-producing assets. And
not at all.
Until governments start giving us wealth-producing assets or infrastructure that enables wealth production.
But you see, we've got a problem here, Bill. We've got a government that's full of people who've never really worked an honest day's work in their lives. They've never actually done anything productive that's actually been constructive, productive. All they are, the government is full of lawyers and accountants and other sort of naysayers, basically. They've never actually produced anything at all, ever.
And they seem hell-bent on to make sure we don't. Private enterprise can't operate either if they keep this sort of well, we do need the government to give us the infrastructure so we can go ahead, but they seem hell-bent on that.
They don't want to give us the infrastructure. Well, they don't want any more farming. That's what it boils down to. That's where this 2 metre rubbish from on the Burdekin Dam came from. They don't want any more farming.
But is it not that they don't only want any more farming? Is it they don't really want any more people, or even the current people who are in North Queensland here anymore? Do they want them to exit and just leave it? No.
Well, I've got a suspicion that Northern Australia has already been ceded, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, to the Chinese.
Well, I won't go that far, but I think maybe to the World Conservation Society.
Well, I think there's been a deal cooked in the United Nations, because the government seem very disinclined to spend any money on anything north of the Tropic of Capricorn.
Well, we do have one sort of counter to that. From what I've been reading recently, the United States is very interested and has just given Australia a big whack in regards to its failure to defend itself, and it's basically suggesting that it will stump up military in our northern Australia, in our I think we've got Sherga on the east coast, and I can't remember.
We've got Sherga and Curtin. Curtin's over at Derby.
Curtin's the west coast.
And neither of these bases are occupied. They're not. They're called bare bases.
That's right. But the Yanks are suggesting, if we don't start, picking our game up, they may need to sort of provide, capability there. So there's are other groups who actually have the hope for us, but it doesn't seem to be coming from Brisbane.
Well, that's because our government is full of socialists who have been on the take from the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, for years.
I don't want to go there at the moment. Here's another thing that we don't have any vision coming out of there to support us. We're not even getting an inkling, because I can talk about Cairns a little bit better than I can talk about Townsville, what we want. But we have been pushing for years to get better access over the Kuranda Range, a much safer road, and also a road that can take BWs.
Mm-hmm.
The two factors about that: A, improves the travelling between and the safety between the tablelands and Cairns. Now, there's been a number of fatalities, but there's regularly accidents there that just block the road, and the road's out of operation for 8 hours or whatever until it's cleared.
Yeah.
The other thing is it's also restricting transport of goods such as fruit and veggies down from the tablelands. It's got to come down in heavy vehicles, single, rigid vehicles, not coming down in a BW or anything like that. So it just rakes the cost up. Now, that's been muted and talked about over a number of years, but what gets continually thrown into the mix is because it's in a World Heritage area, the costs are going to be too high because they'll have to put tunnels. So talking about, $2 billion. Well, if you put a big price on a project in the north, that's the best way to kill it, because they're not going to go and find that sort of money for us.
No,
they might go and
that's right. It's
so you've got to get costs down.
That's right.
There is no reason, like a lot of people live in fear of World Heritage listing, and it's absolutely gobbledygook. It's not true. Convention always provided for modifications to listings, so you could actually, if you wanted to put in a whole new city in the middle of the rainforest, you have to come up with a submission and put it into them and say, well, we want to modify it modified, and then they would evaluate it. It's
You know
not
how much
automatic.
You know how much chance you got of that happening?
Well, that's not actually true, because there's a reason why you got listing, and it comes to an overall all points. And if you go and look at, if you ever go and look at the submission that's signed off by Graham Richardson for the wet tropics, there's holes in that the nth end, because they never drew any maps. It was all just, there's 17 pages of titles in there. And I'm sure you could go through there and just pick out a few titles where it was not pristine area, and then trade those off for things. So it's not impossible. And the thing is, the World Heritage Commission actually does have has a process to modify. It has an application form. It has a whole guidelines how to change it, and it basically tells you, as long as you have it in by the 23rd of February each year, it will be assessed in that year. So they are open to it. And I mean, you can look at Canada. They've got heaps of World Heritage area through their Rocky Mountains in their forest. They still have 4-lane highways through, because of the weather conditions. You just, you want safe passage in those sort of winter conditions. You've got to have good roads. So there was no restriction for them to have put in something there for safety purposes, so people could transfer from one city to the other, transit. So for safe transit, they did that on that provision. So there's no reason why we couldn't make the case for safe transit across the thing. We couldn't come up and the modification, and it's still, and if you have a look at the wet tropics heritage area, it's 9,000 square miles, for God's sake, 9,000 square kilometres, the 3,000 kilometre boundary, and in there's already existing farming land. There's forests there's forests that have been worked over the past 100 years. It's just got regrowth. It's not pristine. It is not pristine area, all of it. And or a lot of it isn't. And the whole point is that wet tropics should be modified to areas that are pristine, and then more culture, and then more things worthwhile preserving. There's a lot of stuff that's just normal re-farmed areas, or just gone to overgrowth. There is a mechanism there, and we shouldn't fear that. And if we could just have a parallel road to the current Kennedy Highway as a steep gradient, we'd probably get a steep gradient road, 2 lanes down, and turn the Kennedy Highway to a 2 lanes up, existing one. We'd probably get away with it for $500 million, and we'd have safe passage. But no one just so chicken about things. And here's something else for Burdekin Dam. I don't know if you noticed, Ep6 now the member for Northern Australia. He took over from Canavan. Canavan stepped down after he supported Barnaby in the leadership for the National Party. Now, Keith Pitt, just the other week, he basically ruled out supplying any funds to a wind farm up on the tablelands here. And there's a bit of an outcry. They're basically calling for his head at the moment, some people. Here's the thing. I think he probably is the first stop for farmers and people who want the Burdekin go back to the 14 metres. They're the one. He's the guy. They should all be lobbying to say go to the original stage 2, or stop this one, so we can do the real stage 2 sometime. He's definitely the go-to guy, and I think maybe people like Barry Lowe, Tony Manning, what's his name, Lindsay, and those people,
Lindsay.
maybe they should do. What's it? Someone Lindsay?
Ted.
What's his Christian name?
Ted
Lindsay. Maybe they need to get a delegation and go. Because it's only down the road. I think he's in Flynn. Is he the member for Flynn? That area down there. It's just in central Queensland. A delegation and go down to his office and basically put it on the line that either 14.6 or nothing.
Yeah,
Probably the
we
best
don't
way
want
to
them.
say the fish.
I think so. That's my position. 14.6 meters or nothing. We don't want them to wreck the dam and ruin any possibility for raising it in the future.
Well, I do have the number for Barry Lowe and Tony Manning and that, but not Ed Lindsay. Maybe I should write an email or phone them and suggest that they sort of head down that way to stop this foolish notion. I'm sure all of those people would prefer nothing than the 2 meters.
But they do. I've met with them regularly, and all three of them are adamant that they do not want them to wreck the current dam by putting a 2 meter block of concrete on top.
Oh, well, there's a go. I think maybe one of the first delegations should be down to see Mr. Keith Pitt.
Keith Pitt the younger, isn't it, or the older?
Like this, is Pitt the
So
replacement?
where's his electorate?
I think he's Flynn. I think his electorate's Flynn.
Where's Flynn?
Just south of Rockhampton area.
Oh, down there.
Yeah, so yeah, because
see, in that case, his electorate would be Bundaberg.
Yeah, I think it takes in Bundaberg as well.
And the Paradise Dam.
Was what's Rocky come under? He might come under.
Well, he couldn't fix it. He couldn't fix the Paradise Dam.
But he wasn't member. He wasn't member for Northern Australia then, and Paradise Dam doesn't come into Northern Australia. Cut off line is the Shire of Gladstone.
Yep.
Across, I think it's got Banana, and then goes all the way out to Quimby, right down to the South Australian border, the corner there, and it just drops below the top of the South Australian border. But that's all Northern Australia Infrastructure Fund. So he, at least now, is the member for Northern Australia, and the Burdekin Dam is an important asset for Northern Australia's future. So maybe he's the man to go down and have a bit of a talk to. If he's willing to stop a wind farm, he might be willing to stop a concrete on top of your dam.
I mean, these wind farms, I've driven past that one out at Hewenden. I don't know how many times, and I don't think I've ever seen those blades going around. You can't be generating much electricity.
They're still generating a lot of money for the owners because they've got guaranteed feed-in tariffs.
Well, that's the whole idea.
Yeah, well, the renting. Anyway, that's a complete different subject, which I'll probably get on with someone one night. It's been a great interview. It did take us a little while to connect and get on the air tonight, so we were running a little bit late. But we've managed to get through our hour without too many technical hitch. Look, Chris, I really appreciate your time, and if you can stay online, I'll just wind up the show and then come back to you.
Okay, mate.
All right, thank you, audience. That's the show for tonight. Join us again next week when we have another interesting episode. I haven't selected the guest that night, but I'll find someone interesting for you. If you enjoyed the show, please follow us on Facebook, and you can also subscribe and like us on our YouTube channel. So until next week, thank you very much.